It was like a myth. Two ancient gods facing against each other, neither able to defeat the other, able only to bring both down to ruin. Before we get started today, I'd like to give a big thank you to the subscribers and those who like, and most importantly of all, those who vote in the polls I send out after each video. Those are very important. Those are what decide the direction that we go on in this story. So, big thank you to those, and enjoy the rest of the video. The Battle of Natreme lasted for nearly a week of constant carnage. It only ended once the Keshik fell into disarray after the chance death of their leader. The Keshik would retreat northward into the Makis steppe, but without a unifying leader, they would fall back into their former tribal divisions, though the Keshik would make short work of eliminating the native Darzik tribes in the steppe. The Stammic tribes that fought alongside Respa had likewise fallen into internal conflicts. The head of the Psalms had also fallen in the battle, and under the Psalm succession law, the eldest chief's son, Narva, was to be the new chief. The younger son, Varith, saw an opportunity for himself, however. Varith inspired many of the Psalms to believe that it was now their right to take revenge against the Otrith tribe, who had betrayed Respa in the Battle of Natreme, and marched down into Zakaria and claimed the former Otrith lands for the Psalms. News of this plan quickly caught the ear of the remaining loyal Otrith and the Valans as well, who also had land in Zakaria. And so, the Otrith joined in with the Valans, and they fled to their lands in Zakaria to prepare for a Psalms invasion. The Skiri did likewise, but kept themselves from integrating with the Valans. Narva was against this plan, however, instead preferring to remain with the Western Emperor, Marcinius. Verith's words were far too convincing to the rest of the Psalms, however, and it would seem that many of them believed it to be their time to carve out their own kingdom from the corpse of Respa. The Psalms would be stuck for now, debating amongst themselves whether to remain loyal or to seize this opportunity and take revenge. In order to defend against the Keshik, Marcinius had pulled on the regions nearby Venya and Bechia. Now, very little remained in comparison. News of the Carmani's invasion into Bechia would reach Marcinius quickly after the Battle of Natreme. He commanded the Stammic tribes to march with him and stop the Carmani, but by this point the Valans and Skiri were gone, and the Psalms were embroiled with themselves. Marcinius attempted to sway the Psalms back in line by promising more settlement lands, but this seemed to only further light the fire beneath Varith and his followers in their belief that Respa was no longer able to defend itself. With no time left to wait, Marcinius and what was left of his Respan army would have to go on alone against the Carmani. The night before they marched off, he rallied his men. Marcinius assured his men of their victory and of how glorious they'd be lauded through history as the saviors of Respa in her darkest hour. None of them would ever step foot in Bechia. The division between Varith and Narva got to the point that a formal split ruptured throughout the Psalms tribe. Those following Varith would go west and become known as the Visasams, while those remaining with Narva would become the Ostrasams. While Narva had wished to remain loyal to Respa, Marcinius's defeat to the Carmani had complicated things, as it seemed there wasn't much of a Respa left to be loyal to. The sentiment of an independent Psalms kingdom had taken root within the Ostrasams as well, though, and so for the time being the Ostrasams would stay in northern Venya as the kingdom of the Ostrasams. Varith and his Visasams did as they planned. The Visasams marched through Gestia and right into Zakaria. It only took a couple of battles for Varith to send the Valans fleeing out across the Metaxagus Sea. While the Visasams still had success against the Skiri, they also suffered some defeats, which halted a full conquest of the Skiri's territory. Deep within the swamps and marshes of southern Venya lived the Dawkins. Throughout their history, the Dawkins were able to resist Respa by using the difficult terrain to their advantage. Despite being extremely divided, the Dawkins were almost always able to band together against external threats such as Respa, or, for a time like this, to invade Venya. Upon hearing of the rapidly disintegrating Western Empire, The Dakins quickly convened the Grozny's, a temporary tribal confederation of sorts, wherein each tribe's chief would vote for one of the chieftains of the smaller Dawkins tribes to be elected as Graz. This Graz would then go on to lead the Dawkins to invade the border regions. The Graz that was elected after the West began to collapse was Gavidus, chieftain of the Saknis tribe. Gavidus would go on to lead the Dawkins in conquering southern Venya, while a few other chieftains went south. While impossible to prove, it is a belief common amongst the Dawkins that it was they who had caught and killed Emperor Marcinius after he was retreating from the Carmani. The Dawkins moved quickly throughout Venya and caught the Ostrosams by surprise. Narva was able to quickly pull together the Ostrosams, and while the Visasams splitting off had effectively cut Narva's forces in half, the Ostrosams were still a decently capable military force. The Dawkins spent the first few months in light skirmishes against the Ostrosams, but always eluding a full battle. On one night, however, the Dawkins had sent spies to infiltrate the Ostrosams' camp, and were able to kidnap Narva. The result was an immediate surrender and the relinquishing of southern Venya to the Dawkins. It was soon after this embarrassing defeat, when in 473, Narva accepted Emperor Tavros's proposal, and the Ostrosams conquered Behia. While much of the west had fallen, the provinces of Gestia, Lyrica, Ischia, and Chorus remained unconquered by the Stammic tribes. The two island provinces of Ischia and Chorus were isolated from the mainland. Chorus was able to operate fairly normally, even allying themselves to the Skiri kingdom across the channel. Ischia, on the other hand, had no one to come to their aid. Trapped on the islands of Prythony, the Ischians were at the behest of the Tasprian tribes there. Slowly the Tasprians would chip away at the Respan holdings there. After the Visasams ran amok through the countryside of Gestia on their way to Zakaria, general chaos and fear ran down the spine of Gestia. An opportunistic general was quick to seize this moment, and General Ludo was now being hailed as the new Western Emperor. Ludo was able to quickly organize the legions left in the region, barring a couple of legions under the command of General Kodros, who had himself taken to running the province of Lyrica and wasn't too keen on Emperor Ludo. Either way, Emperor Ludo went out on a campaign against the Visasams in 473. At first, Emperor Ludo saw much success. By winter, he had pushed the Visasams completely out of Gestia. Varith and his Visasams refused to surrender, however, and fighting would continue for the next few years. Very few adjustments would be made to the border past the first year, until in 476 when General Kodros was coronated as the Western Emperor by the Bishop of Selinum. You see, Emperor Ludo was one of those non-Chaldean heretics, and the Bishop of Selinum, as the de facto religious head in the remnants of the Western Empire, saw it as his duty to push the West back into the main line of Hellenistism before Ludo could steer the people away. Ludo was trapped fighting the Visasams down south, and so for the time being, there was very little in a way of opposition to the new Emperor Kodros. Eventually, Varith and his Visasams would accept peace with Ludo in 480, after which Ludo was able to sway the king of the Folak, Zuzan, to join him back north to contest Kodros' position as emperor. Ludo didn't make it very far before Zuzan betrayed Ludo. The Folaks had attacked the Respans in their camp while they slept. Ludo was killed along with many of his soldiers. Afterwards, Zuzan took his men and went back to their home in Zakaria. While shocked, Kodros was overall happy with the news of Ludo's demise. The rest of the century went fairly well for the Gestians. Peace had continued on with the Visasams, though there were fears of a new threat to the east. After the Ostrosams had left to conquer Behia, the land in their old kingdom was more or less up for grabs. The Dawkins were the first to seize the opportunity, but it only lasted for a little more than a decade before the Corbi and the Ankhs arrived in the region in 485. While most of the conquered land still retained a vast majority population of Respins, northern Venya at this point had become very depopulated as it was the center of so much war and conquest. Many of those who weren't slain in the many wars following the collapse fled westward into Gestia. The Corbe and Ankhs were vicious warriors, but were still divided. They didn't have any unifying confederation like the Dawkins, only wars for power. In 498, one chieftain would reign supreme between the two tribes, Philo, king of the Ankhs and the Corbe. But for now, they remained on their side of the mountains.